Most people believe pain is something the human mind naturally avoids. We like to think that if something hurts us, we will eventually walk away from it. That logic feels obvious, rational, clean. But psychology tells a very different story. Because if humans truly avoided pain, toxic relationships wouldn't last years, unfulfilling jobs wouldn't drain entire lifetimes, and patterns that quietly destroy people wouldn't repeat, generation after generation. The truth is far more disturbing. The human mind does not choose what is healthiest. It chooses what is familiar. And sometimes, what is familiar hurts. This is the dark psychology of familiar pain. Pain that doesn't shock you anymore. Pain that feels predictable. Pain you've learned how to survive. And survival, to the brain, often feels safer than happiness. Think about it. If pain were unbearable, you'd leave. If it were constant torture, there would be no confusion. But familiar pain is subtle. It whispers instead of screams. It gives you just enough comfort to stay, and just enough hurt to keep you doubting yourself. Psychologists describe this as emotional homeostasis. Your nervous system learns what normal feels like, not what's good, not what's healthy, just what it recognizes. And once something becomes familiar, the brain treats it as safe, even if it's slowly destroying you. This is why people stay in relationships that drain them, why they return to people who repeatedly disappoint them, why they remain loyal to environments that break their spirit. Not because they enjoy pain, but because their nervous system understands it. Your brain's first priority is not happiness. It is predictability. An unpredictable future, even a better one, triggers fear, because fear signals danger. But predictable pain, that can be managed. You already know how to survive it. You've adapted, and adaptation can look dangerously similar to strength. Here's where it gets darker. Your brain doesn't just tolerate familiar pain. It actively protects it. Change requires uncertainty, and uncertainty forces your nervous system into high alert. So your mind begins to defend the pain. It rationalizes it, minimizes it, explains it away. You tell yourself things like, "It's not that bad. They didn't mean it. All relationships are hard. At least I know what to expect." These thoughts feel logical, reasonable, but they are not clarity. They are protection mechanisms. Your mind is trying to keep you inside a known environment, because leaving it would mean emotional chaos, even if that chaos leads to peace later. Psychologists call this loss aversion. We experience loss far more intensely than gain, even if what we're losing is harmful. Leaving familiar pain feels like losing identity, losing history, losing certainty. So the brain chooses the devil it knows. This is why people often say, "I know it hurts, but I can't imagine life without them." They're not talking about love. They're talking about orientation. That person has become a psychological landmark, a reference point for identity, routine, and emotional regulation. Remove it, and the entire internal map collapses. Another uncomfortable truth. Many people mistake familiar pain for emotional depth. They believe intensity equals meaning. The highs feel incredible because they're relief from pain. The lows feel devastating because the nervous system is dysregulated. This creates an emotional roller coaster. And roller coasters are addictive. This is known as intermittent reinforcement, the most powerful conditioning mechanism in psychology. When affection, validation, or peace comes unpredictably, the brain releases more dopamine than it would with consistency. The unpredictability strengthens attachment. You're not attached to the person. You're attached to the relief. The moment things are calm again, your body relaxes. Your mind says, "See, it's okay now." But calm is not the same as safety. Relief is not love. And yet the brain learns the pattern. Pain, relief, pain, relief. Over time, peace begins to feel boring, and stability feels empty. Familiar pain feels alive. This is how people become emotionally loyal to environments that harm them. And the most dangerous part? The pain begins to feel personal. You don't just experience it, you internalize it. You start believing the pain says something about you, that you're too sensitive, too needy, too demanding. Psychologists call this self-blame conditioning. When pain is consistent, the brain looks for patterns. And when it can't control the external source, it turns inward. If I change, maybe the pain will stop. This creates a false sense of control. Because believing the problem is you feels better than believing you are powerless. So you adjust, shrink, adapt. You become quieter, more patient, less demanding. Not because you're weak, but because your mind is trying to survive. This is how familiar pain becomes normalized. And once it's normalized, it becomes invisible. You don't notice how much of yourself you've lost, until one day, in a quiet moment, something feels missing. Not dramatic sadness, not heartbreak, just emptiness. A numb realization that this isn't what life was supposed to feel like. And yet, you stay. Because leaving would mean facing the unknown. And the unknown feels terrifying to a nervous system trained in survival. This is not a flaw. It is biology. But understanding it is the first crack in the prison. Because once you see the pattern, you can no longer unsee it. And that awareness is where change begins. The roots of familiar pain rarely begin in adulthood. They begin much earlier, long before we have the language to explain what we feel. Psychologists know that the nervous system doesn't learn safety from logic. It learns safety from repetition. As children, we don't analyze environments. We absorb them. We learn what love feels like by how it is given. We learn what connection feels like by how it is withheld. We learn what normal feels like by what we are exposed to over and over again. If love was inconsistent, your nervous system learned to stay alert. If affection was conditional, your mind learned to perform. If emotional warmth came and went unpredictably, your body learned to wait. This isn't memory in the traditional sense. It's wiring. By the time you're an adult, your nervous system already has a blueprint. It knows what connection usually costs, and it quietly seeks environments that match that cost. This is why some people feel strangely comfortable in relationships that confuse them. Not because they enjoy confusion, but because confusion feels familiar. Psychologists call this attachment conditioning. An anxious attachment system doesn't crave love. It craves resolution. It becomes magnetized to people who withhold clarity, because clarity feels like relief. An avoidance system doesn't fear connection. It fears engulfment. It seeks partners who keep emotional distance because distance feels safe. And when these systems meet, they lock together in what psychology calls a trauma bond. A trauma bond is not formed through cruelty alone. It's formed through contrast. Pain followed by closeness. Distance followed by intimacy. Coldness followed by warmth. Each cycle strengthens the bond. The nervous system becomes dysregulated, then soothed. And the soothing feels like love. But love is not supposed to regulate your survival responses. Peace is supposed to be the baseline, not the reward. Trauma bonds are powerful because they hijack the same neurochemical systems used for survival. Cortisol during conflict, dopamine during relief, oxytocin during reconciliation. Your body becomes chemically invested. This is why leaving feels physically painful, why it feels like withdrawal, why your chest tightens at the thought of separation. This isn't imagination. Your body is losing a regulation source, even if that source was harmful. And here's something people rarely talk about. Highly intelligent people are often more vulnerable to familiar pain because intelligence doesn't protect you from emotional wiring. In fact, it can trap you longer. Smart minds explain. They contextualize. They empathize. They see nuance where others see red flags. They say things like, "They had a hard childhood. They're under a lot of stress." They don't mean it. I understand why they act this way. Understanding becomes a cage, because empathy without boundaries turns into self-abandonment. And the more you understand the pain of the other person, the more you minimize your own. Psychologists call this emotional over-identification. You don't just feel for them, you feel responsible for them. And responsibility creates obligation. Obligation feels like loyalty. This is why walking away can feel morally wrong even when staying feels emotionally lethal. Your identity becomes fused with endurance. You are the strong one, the patient one, the one who stays. And leaving would mean betraying the version of yourself you've spent years being. There's also the silent erosion of self-worth. Familiar pain doesn't destroy self-esteem in one blow. It erodes it gradually. Each dismissed feeling, each unaddressed hurt, each boundary crossed without repair. Over time, you stop asking for more, not because you don't deserve it, but because your nervous system has learned that asking leads to disappointment. So you preemptively lower your expectations. You settle emotionally before you ever consciously decide to. This is known as learned emotional limitation. Your mind adjusts the ceiling of what feels possible. You don't dream of peace. You dream of slightly less pain. And when you finally receive basic kindness, it feels extraordinary. But basic kindness is not intimacy. It's the minimum. Another reason familiar pain holds such power is identity continuity. Your mind prefers consistency over correctness. Leaving means rewriting your personal story. It means admitting, I stayed too long. I tolerated too much. I didn't listen to myself. And that realization can trigger shame. So instead, the mind preserves the narrative. It reframes endurance as virtue. It tells you, this made me stronger. This taught me lessons. This is part of my growth. Growth is real. But pain does not need to be prolonged to be meaningful. Sometimes the lesson has already been taught, and staying only reinforces the wound. There's also the fear of emotional emptiness. When chaos disappears, silence appears, and silence can be terrifying. Without constant emotional activation, the nervous system feels exposed. This is why some people leave toxic relationships only to feel lost. The intensity is gone, but they don't yet know how to rest. They mistake calm for emptiness. But emptiness is not the absence of love. It's the absence of overstimulation. The nervous system needs time to recalibrate. This is why healing feels uncomfortable at first. Peace can feel unfamiliar. Predictable kindness can feel boring. Stability can feel unsettling, because your system hasn't learned that this is safe yet. And this is the turning point most people misunderstand. Leaving familiar pain is not an event. It's a process. It doesn't begin with walking away. It begins with seeing clearly. It begins with noticing how often you silence yourself, how often you justify hurt, how often you trade truth for comfort. Awareness destabilizes the pattern. Once you see it, the pain no longer feels invisible. And when pain becomes conscious, it loses its power. In the next part, we'll explore what actually breaks the cycle. Not through force, not through willpower, but through rewiring safety itself. Because you cannot think your way out of familiar pain. You must teach your nervous system a new definition of home. The most confusing moment comes after you begin to pull away. Not when you're still inside the pain, but when you finally create distance. This is when the mind rebels. Suddenly, the memories soften. The bad moments blur. The good ones replay on a loop. You remember laughter, connection, the way they looked at you when things were good, and the pain that once felt unbearable now feels survivable. This is not clarity. This is withdrawal. When familiar pain is removed, the nervous system panics. It has lost its reference point. Your body doesn't register freedom as safety yet. It registers it as uncertainty. And uncertainty to the survival brain feels like danger. This is why people return, not because they forgot the pain, but because their nervous system is begging for regulation. Psychologists call this emotional relapse. It's similar to addiction. The substance isn't the person. It's the emotional pattern, the highs, the lows, the relief. And the absence of that cycle leaves a void that feels unbearable at first. This is why missing someone who hurt you feels so confusing. You're not missing the harm. You're missing the familiar rhythm, the chaos that once kept your nervous system occupied. When life becomes quiet, unresolved emotions surface. Grief, anger, loneliness, fear. And without the distraction of conflict, you finally feel them. This can make leaving feel like a mistake. But what you're experiencing isn't regret. It's detox. Another reason the pull feels so strong is identity collapse. For a long time, your role was defined by the relationship. You were the one who adapted, the one who tried harder, the one who understood. When that role disappears, a strange emptiness emerges. Who are you when you're not fixing something? Who are you when there's no emotional fire to put out? The mind hates unanswered questions, so it tries to return to the familiar script, even if that script hurts. But this discomfort is not a sign you were wrong to leave. It's a sign you are changing, and change destabilizes old survival strategies. There's also something deeper at play. Familiar pain often masks unresolved wounds from earlier in life. When the relationship ends, those original wounds surface. Abandonment fears, worthiness doubts, the fear of being unseen. The relationship wasn't the cause of these wounds. It was the cover. And without it, you finally have to face them. This is why healing feels harder than staying. Staying numbs. Healing exposes. But exposure is how wounds close. Not through avoidance, through contact. This is where many people turn back. Not because the pain is too much, but because they were never taught how to hold it. They weren't taught how to sit with discomfort without self-blame. So they return to the familiar pain, where at least the rules are known. But here's the truth psychology makes clear. Familiar pain feels safer than healing pain, until healing pain becomes familiar. And that only happens through repetition. Safety must be practiced, not intellectually, somatically. Your nervous system must experience consistency without volatility. This is why logic alone doesn't free you. You can know all the reasons you should leave and still feel pulled back. Because the nervous system doesn't respond to arguments. It responds to experience. So what actually breaks the cycle? Not strength, not discipline, but new safety associations. Small repeated moments where calm is not followed by punishment. Where kindness is not followed by withdrawal. Where silence is not followed by abandonment. This can feel boring at first. Your system may even interpret it as emptiness. But over time, boredom transforms into peace, and peace becomes addictive in its own way. This is why healthy relationships often feel underwhelming at first. There's no emotional spike, no dramatic reconciliation, no intense relief, just consistency. And consistency doesn't flood your system with chemicals. It stabilizes it. That stability can feel foreign, even uncomfortable, but it's not absence of love. It's the presence of safety. Another critical shift happens when you stop romanticizing endurance. Endurance is not love. Survival is not intimacy. Staying despite pain is not proof of depth. Sometimes it's proof of conditioning. Real love does not require you to shrink. It does not require constant self-negotiation. It does not ask you to trade your nervous system for connection. One of the most powerful realizations is this. If you have to convince yourself that something is okay, it usually isn't. Your body knows before your mind admits. The tension, the exhaustion, the quiet dread. These are not weaknesses. They are signals. And the longer they're ignored, the louder they become. The goal isn't to never feel pain. The goal is to stop confusing pain with love. And this brings us to the most important part. Healing doesn't mean erasing the past. It means integrating it, understanding that the version of you who stayed was doing the best they could with the tools they had. There is no shame in survival. But survival is not meant to be permanent. You weren't meant to live in defense mode forever. The final stage of breaking free isn't anger. It's clarity. The quiet knowing that something costs you too much. That clarity doesn't scream. It settles. And once it settles, going back becomes harder than moving forward. In the final part, we'll talk about what real emotional freedom looks like. Not the fantasy version, but the grounded, peaceful version. The kind that doesn't need chaos to feel alive. Real emotional freedom is not loud. It doesn't come with fireworks nor with dramatic declarations. It is quiet, steady, unassuming. It is a calm that your nervous system slowly learns to recognize as normal, not foreign. At first, it will feel empty. Because you are so used to chaos that calm seems unnatural. You may catch yourself thinking, is this all there is? And that thought is not a flaw. It is a transitional state. Your mind is adjusting from adrenaline-driven survival to sustainable life. When you stop chasing highs and lows, your body notices. Heart rate slows. Breathing deepens. Muscles release tension you didn't realize you were holding. Even the subtle aches of chronic stress begin to fade. This is what real safety feels like. Not excitement. Not obsession. Not the spike of relief after conflict. Just presence. Just stability. Just you. The second layer of freedom is identity reconstruction. For too long, your story was intertwined with survival. You were the negotiator of pain, the fixer of broken cycles, the silent absorber of instability. To step out is to confront the blank page. Who are you if you are not defined by endurance? Who are you when you are not reacting to someone else's volatility? This is terrifying because your mind has been trained to respond to chaos. And chaos is predictable in its unpredictability. At least you know what to expect. Calm, on the other hand, is ambiguous. It asks you to sit with yourself without distraction. And many people are not used to that. But here is the profound truth. Once you learn to sit in your own presence, you realize that you are enough. Not your patience, not your tolerance, not the role you played for years. Just you. This realization is not instantaneous. It builds gradually, layer by layer, like sediment forming a foundation. A coffee ritual in the morning, a walk alone in the park, writing in a journal where nobody will ever read it, listening to music that resonates with your inner state, engaging in a hobby purely for joy, not to impress anyone. All of these moments teach your nervous system a new language. You can exist fully and safely without chaos. And as your nervous system recalibrates, your relational lens changes. You start to notice patterns that were invisible before. You see the difference between love that nourishes and love that consumes. You recognize the early warning signs. You feel the subtle vibrations of intention and care. You are no longer blind to manipulations because your own baseline has shifted. This shift also transforms your decision-making. Choices are no longer colored by fear or survival instincts. Instead, they are guided by clarity and grounded desire. You choose what serves your growth. You say no to what drains you. And paradoxically, this makes the world feel safer, even though it once felt terrifying to stand firm. Another essential part of liberation is the concept of emotional literacy. You learn to identify subtle triggers, the knot in your stomach when someone invalidates you, the creeping anxiety when your boundaries are tested, the warmth that arises when you are genuinely seen. By naming these sensations, you begin to own them. No longer do they hijack your actions. No longer do they chain you to familiar pain. At this stage, relationships change too. Not all people will fit into your new blueprint. Some who once felt indispensable will now seem toxic or misaligned. This is not rejection. It is alignment. Your new internal compass is incompatible with the old patterns. And that is exactly how it should be. True freedom also means embracing uncertainty without panic. For years, the mind equated uncertainty with danger, leaving, changing, stepping into the unknown. All of these were terrifying because your survival wiring screamed risk. But with recalibration, uncertainty becomes opportunity. The unknown is no longer a void to be feared. It is a canvas, waiting for your presence to paint upon it. And then comes the final transformation. You stop seeking permission for your own peace. No one has to validate your boundaries. No one has to excuse your absence from toxicity. No one has to approve the joy you allow yourself to feel. You carry that authority within. It is not arrogance. It is sovereignty over your own experience. Psychologically, this is profound. For decades, the brain reinforced survival circuits that prioritized connection over self. Now the same brain rewires to prioritize integrity and wholeness. And as it rewires, your confidence naturally follows. You do not need constant reassurance. You do not need external validation. You do not need chaos to feel alive. And here is the most liberating insight of all. The world itself does not change. Your relationship with it does. Pain does not vanish. People still disappoint. Challenges persist. But your internal ecosystem has shifted. You respond with stability. You act from clarity. You move through life with a measured, conscious rhythm rather than a reactionary spiral. At this point, life becomes a different experience. You notice subtle joys that were always there, but previously drowned out. The aroma of coffee in the morning, the quiet hum of wind through trees, the depth of a good conversation, even the comfort of silence. These moments are not monumental. They are elemental. And because you are present for them, they feel profound. This is why leaving is only the first step. The real work is internal. It is emotional recalibration. It is identity reconstruction. It is learning to feel fully without attachment to chaos. It is discovering that love in its purest form does not hurt, and that you are capable of giving it to yourself. And so the last piece of advice is deceptively simple. Start where you are, right now. In this moment, with your breath, with your attention. Notice the tension. Acknowledge the exhaustion. And then on just one step, choose yourself. One small act of self-respect. One moment of clarity. One gentle boundary. And repeat, because freedom is built one moment at a time. Healing is constructed one breath at a time. Sovereignty is claimed one decision at a time. The 18 inches between your head and your heart, that is where liberation lives. And it has always been waiting for you. Waiting for the courage to notice. Waiting for the courage to choose. Waiting for the courage to feel safe inside yourself. Finally, completely irrevocably, you are not trapped because you are weak. You are trapped because you are human. But that same humanity is your greatest strength. The heart that endured, adapted, and survived. That same heart has, buried within it, an unkillable capacity for love. Love that begins with you. Love that does not demand compromise of your safety or your essence. Love that is steady, calm, and alive. And when you finally claim that love for yourself, everything else, the chaos, the doubts, the pulls back to pain, becomes powerless.